All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of APA Ohio and Vice Chair of the New Urbanism Division, and I will be the administrator for today's webcast. Today, Wednesday, November 12th, we will hear the presentation, Environmental Justice, a New Model for Planning in Underserved Communities. For technical help during today's webcast, type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or call the 1-800 number shown. For content questions related to the presentation, type those in the questions box also located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions. I would like to thank all of the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Planning in the Black Community Division. To learn more about all of the divisions APA has to offer, visit planning.org/divisions. And to learn about chapters, visit planning.org/chapters. On your screen is a list of upcoming webcasts. To register for these webcasts, visit www.utah-apa.org/webcasts. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, visit planning.org, go to your dashboard, and select Activities by Provider. Select today's provider, which is the Planning in the Black Community Division, and select the event. This webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. Some recorded webcasts are available for distance education CM credit. For availability of our distance education credits, check the webcast webpage at utah-apa.org/webcasts. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our upcoming sessions. We are recording today's webcast, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. You can request a PDF of the PowerPoint by emailing planningwebcast@yahoo.com. I'd now like to introduce Carlton Ely, who will take it from here. Carlton Ely is an environmentalist, urban planner, and lecturer. Possessing an appreciation for environmental justice and sustainable urban policy, he has become an accomplished expert on the topic of equitable development in the public sector. He has coordinated national competitions that recognize communities for encouraging equitable development, and he has published multiple articles on the subject. Since 2005, Carlton has offered numerous lectures on equitable development, including presentation in New Zealand, British Columbia, and the United Arab Emirates. Carlton has a BA in Sociology Social Work curriculum from Elizabeth City State University and a Master's of Science in Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Iowa. So with that, I'm turning it over to Carlton.
Thank you, Christine, for that introduction, and I'm currently switching things over in terms of the controls. Also, I want to thank the members of our audience for taking the time to join us. Again, my name is Carlton Ely, and I work in EPA's Office of Environmental Justice in Washington, D.C. Before I get ahead of myself, I just want to acknowledge EPA's Office of Environmental Justice has enjoyed partnering with Planning in the Black Community Division of the American Planning Association on this webinar series. For almost 35 years, the division has been committed to the professional development of its members, making great communities happen, as well as elevating important policy issues, including environmental justice. Educational opportunities like this webinar represent one means for connecting with the public, and since July, it's been a pleasure to have practitioners sharing their knowledge about important topics, including cultural sustainability, as well as equitable development. The focus of today's webinar is environmental justice, a new model for planning in underserved communities. The objective is to share how citizens and practitioners are advancing solutions which target the nexus between environmental justice and community planning for the purpose of improving public involvement, encouraging community action for a renewed environment, supporting collaborative problem solving, and making a visible difference in communities. As an environmentalist and an urban planner, I take great interest in this topic. This discussion is timely because of the increasing focus on social equity in the context of sustainability and planning policy. As the U.S. EPA celebrates the 20th anniversary of establishing an environmental justice program, we realize the public has become accustomed to hearing messaging about environmental justice framed in the context of problem identification. We're using this milestone to elevate there's actually a very impressive narrative of problem solving. Across the country, communities are finding ways to align environmental justice and planning as complementary quality of life goals. And today's webinar gives us an opportunity to briefly celebrate how everything old is now new again. The market for place-based solutions is not static. And in a nation of 317 million people, there's pent-up demand for planning solutions that are particularly responsive to the needs of communities with environmental justice concerns. The Office of Environmental Justice and the Planning and the Black Community Division of APA didn't want the 20th anniversary to lapse without elevating a spectrum of work, tools, and outcomes that are at the intersection of environmental justice and planning. We thought this webinar would be an appropriate way to elevate strategies and solutions that may be transferable. Today we are joined by 4 experts. Our presenters are Charles Lee, Dr. Marva King, Dr. Mildred McLean, and myself. The presenters will wrap up their remarks by 2:00 p.m. approximately, and then we will transition into the question and answer portion of our webinar, which will be led by Christine Dursey. Charles Lee is our first presenter. Charles is the Deputy Associate Assistant Administrator for Environmental Justice at the U.S. EPA. Mr. Lee is widely recognized as a true pioneer in the arena of environmental justice. He was the principal author of the landmark report, Toxic Waste and Race in the United States, and he helped to spearhead the emergence of a national environmental justice movement. Charles, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Carlton, and I want to thank everyone for taking part in this webinar today, and of course to thank Carlton for inviting me to speak. My presentation today is essentially about how environmental justice and planning are interrelated, and what are some tools and strategies developed by EPA that may be useful to planners. First, I want to start with a quote from Professor Craig Tony Arnold, who holds the endowed Bold Chair of Property and Land Use Law at the Louis Brandeis School of Law at the University of Louisville. Professor Arnold recently wrote a book for the American Planning Association entitled Fair and Healthy Land Use, Environmental Justice and Planning. And I quote, he says, "The very nature of planning itself calls for the adoption and implementation of environmental justice principles and policies. Planning is the process of identifying goals for the future, developing policies or plans for achieving the goals, and fashioning specific mechanisms for implementing the plans." The American Planning Association in 1979 had defined planning as a comprehensive, coordinated, and continual process, the purpose of which is to help public and private decision makers arrive at decisions which promote the common good of society. Next slide. In the 1980s, a groundswell of grassroots activity led to what we now know as the environmental justice movement. The EJ movement is a national network of grassroots groups fighting the disproportionate impact of environmental decisions, land use policies, and regulatory processes on low-income people of color and tribal communities. As it became apparent that these weren't isolated incidents citizens are at the grassroots level are starting to talk, organize, research, and amplify their voice. One pivotal event was the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991, which I helped to organize. It adopted 17 principles of environmental justice, which have been used now, not only in this country, but around the world. This slide references 5 of those principles, and they may resonate with persons who are planners, who work on urban policy, and who manage the built environment. As Professor Arnold pointed out, planning is a comprehensive, coordinated, and continuing process. Part of an effective, comprehensive approach must be our connecting with and learning from persons and communities who have experienced and are dealing with disproportionate burdens. Next slide. A crosswalk of the values shared by planners and EJ proponents, as seen through the lens of APA's, the American Planning Association's Code of Ethics, and EPA's Environmental Justice Program, show how much congruence there is between these two areas. The next several slides will highlight several of the formative concepts behind EPA's environmental justice programs and some events and programs associated with them. I also want to mention that I will be providing a distinctly personalized perspective on these, as I was involved with many of them, either from the vantage point being outside or inside EPA. Next slide. Carlton felt that it was important to understand what is the current perspective and normative behavior in both the planning and environmental fields when it comes to addressing issues of equity and justice and citizens' participation in decision-making. So both of these quotes illustrate the inclination, whether intentional or unintentional, to turn a blind eye towards issues of social factors or determinants, environmental justice, and equity. Sometimes in response to these issues of concern to environmental justice are simply, they are beyond my purview. The second statement above was made by EPA in response to my landmark report, Toxic Waste and Race in the United States, which was the first national study on the demographic patterns associated with the location of hazardous waste sites when I sent it to EPA. I will amplify on this, and it says that EPA addresses issues of technology, not sociology. I will amplify on this in the next slide, but it is instructive to show how the first action or response of EPA was to say that it did not deal with these issues. However, it will illustrate, I think, as we go through this presentation, how far we have come during the past 30 years. Next slide. Now, as I said earlier, there was an ongoing set of studies which found that environmental hazards were inequitably distributed. One of those was my study, identified above, but there were studies related to air toxics, location of solid waste sites, lead poisoning, and so on and so forth. The University of Michigan held a conference on the incidence of environmental hazards, race in the incidence of environmental hazards, out of which a number of us wrote to EPA and subsequently met with Administrator Bill Riley in 1992. Those conversations led to the EPA's establishing the Office of Environmental Equity, later renamed the Office of Environmental Justice, the establishment of a National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and in 1994, President Clinton's issuance of the Executive Order 12898 on environmental justice. I do want to say, however, that it is fine or it is important to have evidence in the inequitable distribution of environmental burdens, but it is also important to be able to do the kind of distribution analysis that incorporates these issues into EPA's decisions. One of the important documents that EPA is working on is guidance in that area, which is technical guidance on assessing environmental justice for regulatory analysis, or is EPA's natural rules. EPA is also developing or has developed a nationally consistent way to identify areas which may need more attention because of potential environmental justice concerns, and that is EJ Screen, which EPA is going to be issuing to the public in the next month or two. It is important that EPA has recognized this problem of disproportionate impacts and has actually named it as an issue of concern to them. And it is to EPA's credit for doing so. It shows that, with all due respect to Mr. Porter's comment, that EPA is not merely dealing with issues of technology. It has made the point that inequitable distribution of environmental impacts along socioeconomic lines is an important concern for environmental decision making. Next slide. EPA's definition of environmental justice speaks to the notion of fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people. EPA, as I've said, established the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and one of the first things that the NEJAC developed was a model plan for public participation, which has been enhanced and used by all agencies in the federal government and many, many others for nearly 20 years. EPA, along with many federal partners, has supported something called community-based participatory research, these follow a number of principles that will really resonate with planners. Things like that recognition of the community as a unit of identity, building on strength and resources within the community, facilitating collaborative, equitable partnerships, and involving partners in dissemination of findings and the knowledge gained. And it is because of this last principle that I mentioned that significant impact or results or changes have taken place because of CBPR-related efforts, like converting the New York City bus fleet to compressed natural gas in an area that has the majority of bus depots in the borough of Manhattan, passing a North Carolina law to ban new hog farm facilities, and establishing a statewide food purchase program in the state of California. President Clinton said in the Executive Order on Environmental Justice, in a memo accompanying the Executive Order, that federal agencies should be using existing laws to implement the Executive Order, including the National Environmental Policy Act. And a hallmark of NEPA is public participation. I do want to report that there has been much progress recently in the development in taking the best practices over the past 20 years and putting them forward in a set of analytic methodologies to incorporate NEPA, environmental justice, into the NEPA review process. And this was based upon concrete examples like the mitigation agreement for the North Charleston Port expansion, which resulted in job training, housing trust, green space development, expanded health care opportunities, and air monitoring. Next. This next slide speaks to an effort through the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council to conduct 5 public hearings around the EPA's Emerging Brownfields program in 1995. And as a result of that, the NEJAC submitted a report to EPA called the Search for the Authentic Signs of Hope. Virtually all of the report's 69 recommendations have been implemented and helped set the foundation for EPA's Brownfield program as one which is focused on revitalizing the entire community, not merely individual site redevelopment. EPA, as a result, has moved to ensure greater community involvement, job training grants, funding going directly to community-based organizations, and federal interagency partnerships, and the annual National Brownfields Conference, which now draws on average an attendance of 5,000 or over 5,000 people. It is important to note that environmental justice, and this is an example of that, is not merely about preventing, removing, or otherwise mitigating negative impacts, but also bring in the positive amenities for building wholesome communities like housing, transportation, healthcare, green space, and so on. EJ is, in fact, about a vision of healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities rooted in the communities themselves. In hindsight, this report can be viewed as one of EPA's first real efforts to address sustainable communities and is a testament to the vision and forward-thinkingness of environmental justice communities over the years. Next slide. A concrete manifestation of the vision of communities is the powerful story of the Regenesis Environmental Justice Partnership in Spartanburg, South Carolina, which was started by community activist and now state representative Harold Mitchell. It started with a $20,000 EPA Environmental Justice small grant to conduct community education on 2 Superfund sites and several brownfield sites in the Arkwright and Forest Grove communities in Spartanburg. And it has evolved into a wholesale community vision of revitalization and has now leveraged over $300 million in public and private funding. It was designated in the early 2000s as an interagency working group on environmental justice, a federal interagency working group on environmental justice demonstration projects, and it has informed the development of EPA's environmental justice collaborative problem-solving model. EPA has developed a video on the Regenesis story and other materials, and I just want to leave the slide by saying that this is a real testament to the power of community vision, planning, partnership, and transformation. Going to the next slide. As we look into the future, I think it's important to highlight 3 things that really should or could point our way. First, the comic book highlighted here speaks to the need to develop a next generation of leaders who are knowledgeable about how to work in both communities and institutions, armed with stellar planning skills and guided by vision and commitment. The second example in terms of things that should guide us in the future is it's the Jacobs Center in San Diego, California, one of whose projects involved 3,000 residents in the planning community revitalization planning process. The Jacobs Center has emphasized the idea of communities truly securing equity in the projects being developed, and this certainly is one of the ways to ensure that communities actually participate in the positive redevelopment, revitalization, not become displaced by gentrification. And lastly, I want to point out one of the most significant recent developments in the arena of environmental policy and climate, which is the passage of California's Senate Bill 535, which mandates that 25% of proceeds from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund go to environmentally and economically disadvantaged communities. And that would be determined by use of tools like the California's analog of EPA's EJ screen, which is Cal Enviro Screen. So next slide. Everything I've said is in support of Administrator McCarthy's priority on making a visible difference in communities. Community visioning and planning tools are critical components to fulfilling her vision for making such a difference. And so in closing, I want to leave you with 2 points. Environmental justice is a planning issue, and environmental justice is a forward-thinking, sustainable approach. We should remember that while one factor contributing to environmental injustice concerns is a failure to plan, a failure to enforce proper zoning, or incompatibility of land uses, we have tried true tried tools to advance environmental justice and planning. I want to commend once again Professor Arnold and APA for taking on this issue and by the publication of that EJ and planning document. As you listen to the next presentations on how these concepts have been turned from ideas into realities at the grassroots level, I want you to keep in mind Professor Arnold's words. The opportunities to incorporate environmental justice principles into land use planning and regulations are abundant. This is because land use planning and regulation offer the promise of a clean, healthy, vibrant, and just environment for all people. Land use planners and planning officials have many tools and techniques at their disposal to make this promise a reality in their communities. The scope of issues affected by environmental injustice is broad, and the theory and practice of planning for environmental justice and equitable land use practices will continue to develop. After all, so much that is important in our society, from the health of children to the strength of our social fabric, is at stake. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles, for those remarks. We also thank you for kicking off the webinar and for setting that very firm foundation based on sharing the fundamentals of environmental justice and planning for our audience. I really appreciate the reference to the Maya's Lot comic. The resource was prepared specifically in order to explain environmental justice for a younger audience, and it reminds me that when the City of Chicago plan of 1909 was prepared, a version of that plan was also prepared for youth in the Chicago school system. So again, thank you for making those connections. We realize you have a presentation, but you will be back around 2 o'clock for the question and answer period. Our second presenter is Dr. Marva King, who is a Senior Policy Advisor in EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. Previously, she served as Program Co-Chair for the Community Action for a Renewed Environment Program. Dr. King worked for over 10 years as a Senior Program Analyst in EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. She managed the Environmental Justice Collaborative Problem Solving Agreement Program and the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Marva King holds a Master's in Public Administration from the University of Delaware and a PhD in Public Policy at George Mason University. Her dissertation research was on effective and sustainable community collaboration. Dr. King's co-presenter is Dr. Mildred McLean. Dr. McLean is founder and executive director for Arambe House, Citizens for Environmental Justice. Dr. McLean served as co-chair of Congressman James Clyburn's National Environmental Policy Commission for 4 years. She is also a Bannerman Fellow and received the Keystone Award for Leadership in the environmental justice field of work. Dr. McLean has over 30 years of teaching and organizing experience. Dr. King and Dr. McLean, I want to thank you both for taking the time to join us today.
You're quite welcome. We're happy to be here. My task is to shift from policy to practice. And I think Charles gave us a great, thorough background on the policies EPA is doing right now. But what I want to do is share how EJ is used as a planning model in underserved communities and how it's being implemented there. And Dr. McLean will give you a concrete example of that. Next slide. So as Charles mentioned earlier, that the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, or NEJAC, has played a substantial role in developing policy at EPA. And I want to point out 2 early reports that NEJAC gave the agency. One was in May of 2000, where NEJAC discussed environmental justice and the community-based health model. They advised then Administrator Christine Todd Whitman to promote a better understanding of community-based participatory research models, to place greater emphasis on translating current and future scientific knowledge into positive action, to promote more effective interagency collaboration and cooperation, to include social, economic, and cultural factors in health assessments, and to respond to urgent needs of medically underserved communities. NEJAC went on 4 years later in 2005 and advised then Administrator Michael Levitt in their EJ and Cumulative Risk Report to institute a bias for action within EPA through the utilization of an environmental justice collaborative solving model. And that model Charles mentioned in his earlier slide was Regenesis and how they used that model to graduate from a 20,000 small grant to a multi-million-dollar project. NEJAC also advised the agency to incorporate the concept of vulnerability into EPA strategic plans and research agendas, to promote a paradigm shift to community-based approaches, and to make sure we have efficient screening, targeting, and prioritization methods and tools to identify communities needed immediate intervention. This type of policy advice from NEJAC was the groundwork for building the infrastructure in the agency that didn't already exist. The agency, before these reports, had no true roadmap without the NEJAC's advice and these recommendations and others. Through this advice, NEJAC, the agency was able to implement 2 major EPA programs. These 2 programs that EPA responded to NEJAC with one was created in 2003. It was, and if you look on the screen, it's called the AICP model up in the top right corner. This was created in 2003 and it's still active today. It provides communities with $100,000 over a 3-year period, but most importantly, they have to go through all these steps that are listed there. And these steps are not in any type of order. It could almost be a circle. But the main thing is part of their issue identification and community vision is that they are planning. The second, underneath that schematic, is a slide called How Care Works. The CARE program is the Community Action for a Renewed Environment program. It was created in 2005. And it was created it was very successful. But it was actually defunded in 2011. The CARE program was that the level 1 grant that we gave out, $100,000 over a 2-year period, was actually a planning grant. The icon there, you'll see number 1 and 2 joined together and identify problems and solutions. They had 2 years to do that, and that was, in essence, a planning grant. But it was community-driven, community-led, and they had to build a partnership around it to do that. The CARE Level 2, which was an implementation grant, it provided up to $300,000 over a 2-year period. And here is where they had to implement solutions to the problems they identified in the CARE Level 1. And they had to build sustainability. What these 2 programs accomplished was to create a cadre of impacted communities facing environmental justice concerns. They conducted their own visioning. They identified what was needed to be addressed. They collaborated through multi-level partnership groups. They reduced pollution in their place-based neighborhoods and achieved measurable environmental and public health results. Today we hear a lot of a word around the agency called citizen science. That's the buzzword in 2014 for the agency. But these two programs were doing citizen science in 2003 and in 2005, and they were doing it through a community-driven approach. The other picture on the slide is the CARE roadmap, and that was created with the NEJAC's help. It was a 10-step roadmap that helps a community go through their planning and identifying the risks, building the partnerships, and implementing results. Next slide. Through the CARE program, oh, I'm on the next, okay, I'm sorry, next slide. This is the National Academy of Public Administration and NAPA. I wanted to just share with you a little bit about this report that was done in 2009. For those of you who may not know what NAPA is, it is a nonprofit, independent organization of top public management leaders who tackle the nation's most critical and complex public management challenges. It was actually established in 1967 and was chartered by Congress in 1984. And it continues to make a positive impact by helping federal, state, and local governments respond effectively to current circumstances and changing conditions. Why I wanted to tell you about NAPA is because in the development of the CARE program, at the same time it was being developed, NAPA conducted a 3-year independent evaluation of the CARE program, and they provided real-time feedback and advice to the agency on this program. Such advice resulted in changes to the request for proposal, adjustments to the design of the program, improvements in the yearly collaborative training workshops that we had between EPA and communities, and guidance to EPA on being more responsive to the communities. It was a program that made the CARE program one of the most successful community-based programs in the agency. In fact, they told Administrator Lisa P. Jackson, this was the community-based program you should hold up for others to look at. Unfortunately, Congress did not think so. The top left-hand picture is a community training meeting by one of our CARE communities in Tacoma Beautiful. That's a northeast section of Los Angeles. Tacoma Beautiful actually was successful in receiving an Environmental Justice Collaborative Problem-Solving Grant and a CARE grant. What I wanted to tell you about Tacoma Beautiful is that it's a mostly Spanish-speaking community, but they established something called a promotorics model, which was training community residents to deliver educational and training throughout the neighborhood. They actually leveraged funding through their partnerships with the Alliance for Healthy Homes, and they developed a healthy home process to decrease lead concerns. That was implemented through their promotorics model. And I think that's important because, as I said, these grant programs were community-driven. It's what the community wanted. They planned, they looked, they decided, and they did what they were successful through the partnership. The lower picture is a community planning meeting by the Pacific American Foundation out in Hawaii. And what was good, why I wanted to put this picture on the slide for you is to show you that they did a great prioritization piece for immediate action activities to reduce illegal dumping and non-point source pollution into streams and the ocean. So they did the part of the collaborative problem-solving piece that says instituting a bias for action, a direct recommendation from the NEJAC. You do not have to wait until you complete your grant to get some immediate results. Next slide, please. These are tools that were developed as in partnership between the impacted environmentally burdened community and a diverse set of stakeholders. I think it's real important to emphasize that. So many times we go out in the agency thinking we know what is best. We do not. That's the purpose of a community-driven approach. That's the purpose of working with impacted communities directly. Again, the roadmap is there so you can see what that is. I talked about that on a previous slide, but I do want to emphasize that it does incorporate the NEJAC bias for action approach. That encourages partnerships to take actions to reduce risk as soon as possible. They do not have to wait until the end of the grant. The other documents are just as important because the community wanted them. They wanted to understand, how do you become sustainable? As a result, there was a sustainability checklist created. This checklist was created as a planning tool to identify areas of concern and plan for continuing on with the community's vision work for after the funds expired. The measurement tips, communities wanted to know, how do they measure the results of what they're doing in their community. That was created. Promising practices was a lessons learned document for us to learn from each other. All of these are on the website. Next slide. I wanted to let you know about this community because it's one of our care communities. It was one of our faith-based communities. It was a partnership that grew around Lake Superior. And what they did, one of the results that they had was they changed the mercury level of Lake Superior by 19%. They did that in collaboration with the local dentists in the area, who then brought the idea and these environmental results of reducing the mercury level in Lake Superior to the dentists across the state. That followed up with conversations on a national level with the American Dental Association, who in turn established a voluntary dental amygdala discharge reduction program. This is important for you to see how these dots were connected through a community-driven, impacted community partnership who envisioned environmental change locally, and then through a partnership affected it nationally. Next slide. My last slide before Dr. McLean begins is a community that also is a care community, and through their level 1 planning grant, they established a community action plan. This action plan identified risks, built coalitions, and addressed immediate concerns. But what I wanted to point out to you is that this 5-year investment plan engaged local business to invest in strategies to reduce cumulative environmental impacts and leverage resources. This community was instrumental in leveraging an additional $3.7 million in funding. And I think that's real important for you to see and hear, and also to know that one of the projects they did through their Healthy Homes project, they helped reduce risk reduction, lead poisoning, risk reduction in 30 households. And they succeeded in addressing these concerns of lead poisoning and asthma. Before I turn this over to Dr. McLean, I do want to say something in addition about her. Dr. McLean is an elder in the EJ movement. So the information Charles Lee was giving you earlier about how the EJ movement developed those principles of EJ, Dr. McLean was right there at the table working on that and making sure that happened. And she is a major mover and shaker down in Savannah. So Dr. McLean, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. The Harambe House Citizens for Environmental Justice received a collaborative problem-solving grant to work with a very small neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia, that is located in the center of about 17 industries. Most of them emit some type of toxin. In addition, we went on to receive the Care Level 1 as well as Care Level 2 grants to continue the work in that community. Working with the Hudson Hill residents, I want to raise 5 things before I go into my structured presentation. First, these people put out a call for about 10 years seeking someone to work with them to address the environmental injustice issues that they were facing. And the Harambe House Citizens for Environmental Justice responded to that call. We made ourselves available to work with the residents, but to uphold the environmental justice principle of we speak for ourselves as the method of operation. So we were the environmental justice organization working in an environmental justice community, but the voice of the residents was in control. We were there to meet with them, to listen, to try to identify resources that could help them, but most of all, to honor their voice. We began to work with them. They made very clear to us that they understood that a people without a vision will truly perish. And they had a vision. Their vision was of a safe, a clean, a healthy, and a sustainable neighborhood where their children and their elders and all of the community residents could really have pleasure in the neighborhood where they had grown up, that was historically a part of their legacy. And they wanted to see an improvement in the quality of life as it related to their health, their environment, and everything that was connected to them. They also made it clear to us that a place-based solution was very important because of scale. When you talk about what happened in Spartanburg, that's at a larger scale than what happened in a small neighborhood like Hudson Hill. Solutions must meet scale. What works in one place may not work in another. But through the roadmap and the steps of the collaborative problem-solving model, we were able to engage those residents at that level, but it grew and grew from a small handful of residents to a multi-layer of diverse stakeholders. They also reminded us that if we failed to plan for the neighborhood, then we certainly were planning to fail. We want to reiterate from their voice that they felt planning was a key to successing. What you see on the screen is something that came out of a visioning charrette that we participated in collaboration with the Corps of Army Engineers. The collaborative problem-solving grant allowed us as an organization to work with the residents and their neighbors, the community leaders, in building a partnership that in fact would help the residents identify their major environmental concerns, their environmental health concerns. We were able to build the capacity of the neighborhood, the community to come together because they had not done that heretofore. We were able to empower the community or to bring out assets that already existed. We were able to bring in academia and the local government, both at the city and the county level. But what was even more crucial, well, we were able to get the 5 largest industries in that area to come to the table and to work with us and to help the community not only identify their concerns and how we might solve those concerns or resolve those concerns, but to create a new vision that everybody could be vested in. And so you see from your slide that we came up with, and actually they came up with, a vision for a green space that would be a central location, a center of drawing people together, to work together, to play together, to learn together. We have presented this vision to the local and county government. We have buy-in, and we're still working on the implementation of that vision. So we started off under the collaborative problem solving grant with a handful of people, but under care level 1, that partnership grew. And it continued to grow under the care level 2. International Paper, Arizona Chemical, Colonial Oil, Ashland, which was formerly known as Hercules, and the Georgia Ports Authority became key players in the collaborative partnership that was established. And they still pledge to work with the community, to work with those neighborhoods in implementing the vision that came out of our plan charrette. Next slide, please. Here, this slide shows and illustrates our community business government roundtable. This roundtable during our grant process met on a monthly basis to look at a work plan and to carry out the activities under that work plan. It was a very successful tool, and we now meet on a quarterly basis to continue the work that was unfinished under the grant process. As a result of this community business roundtable, the city, under its first African American female city manager, decided to incorporate both Hudson Hill and Woodville into their revitalization plan, their Promised Neighborhood plan, and it put together a 5 to 10 year master development plan for each of these neighborhoods. We started out working with Hudson Hill, and because of the close proximity of Woodville and the fact that they too were impacted by the industrial complex, we included them in the care level 1 and 2 implementation. We were able to use our business partners to help us not only in terms of identifying potential strategies to address issues, but they provided resources as well, places for us to meet. They provided food for our meetings. They provided replication of our materials. Also, they participated in creating our first community garden. That's one of the lasting pieces of our work, is a community garden, because Hudson Hill is labeled as a food desert, and they do suffer from food insecurity. Because of our grants from EPA, we provided the resources along with our industrial partners to start and continue this community garden, which now provides food primarily for its senior citizens and citizens who are having some type of sickness or some type of tragedy in their home. This garden helped the city to develop its first set of guidelines and standards on how the 600 acres of FEMA land in Savannah would be used in terms of creating community gardens that would address the food needs of our citizens. The relationship grew, and we finally got the approval and the sanction of our mayor. He attended the planning charrettes. He attended our risk prioritization sessions, and then he finally agreed to put resources into the project. We have a new mayor now that is continuing that commitment. We are currently meeting both with our city manager, who is really the decision maker in the city, and our mayor to meet with our new regional administrator of EPA to look at how we can complete the agenda that was started in what we term West Savannah, which includes Woodville and Hudson Hill. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Well, as we wait for the next slide, I'll just tell you that the community, the local government, the federal government, and our business partners continue to work in this partnership. We have pursued a deeper relationship with Savannah State University to serve as our academic partner in addressing strategies that we can use to build a safe and healthy neighborhood in Hudson Hill. Hudson Hill and Woodville have worked closely with Harold Mitchell and the residents of Spartanburg. Our goal is to replicate on a smaller scale what they've done there. And as a matter of fact, we're entertaining calling ourselves Regenesis 2. It is important that residents are trained in the planning process. We use the 4 steps of the collaborative problem-solving model, as well as the 10 steps of the care roadmap, looking very closely at whose voice was at the table. We took it step by step. We assessed ourselves and our progress after each step. We took what would be done in a meeting back to the residents for their approval, for their input. We were really excited that most of the residents applauded our efforts and they continue to participate in the work today. What EPA was able to do with the problem-solving grant, with the CARE grant, is immeasurable. Even though this project in Savannah has yet to leverage millions of dollars, what it did was it provided tools to a disenfranchised, marginalized neighborhood that is now able to speak for itself, that is now able to sit at a table with industrial leaders, community leaders, government leaders, academic leaders, and hold their own, voice their concerns, and participate in problem solving that is sustainable, that will create the vision that they have had for the past 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McLean.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. McLean. I had to unmute my microphone, and we really appreciate the dual presentation that was offered by Dr. King as well as Dr. McLean. Dr. King used a term that you may not have picked up on the nuance of. She mentioned a number of times community-driven process, and one of the things that I do want to point out is that when she was elevating that term, she's referring to the fact that the process was driven by the citizens who are actually in the affected communities. The process is not necessarily exclusive of local government, but I do want to make sure that it is clear to everyone who is participating that she's not conflating community and local government as meaning the same thing. It has been very important, particularly for those of us who work on issues of environmental justice, particularly given the fact that often a question that may be raised is, what does the community want? We try not to project. Instead, we try to be mindful that if we want to have a clear sense in terms of what the needs are of those who are affected, we have to first start talking with them directly in order to encourage approaches and planning pursuits that will work with them rather than work against their needs. Thank you again, Dr. McLean. Thank you again, Dr. King. It's currently 2 o'clock. Actually, we have just one more presentation to offer, and then we will transition into the question and answer portion of our discussion. I was running into some technical issues. But again, Charles and Marva have introduced an impressive set of results and strategies. Their presentations reveal EPA's approach to environmental justice is not static. My remarks will focus on equitable development, and this is a topic we covered in September, but it's worth revisiting today because it's relevant to our conversation on environmental justice. As Marva indicated, the term place-based has become a popular watchword in recent years. In many ways, equitable development could be viewed as a place-based approach for advancing the goals of environmental justice. One of the subtle themes in Marva's presentation is pathways. Her experience working on environmental justice at EPA eventually progressed into the CARE model. My experience working on environmental justice as a student intern actually took me on a different path. In 1994, just to offer you a little bit of background, I was actually a college student, and 4 months after the signing of the executive order for environmental justice, I was offered a summer internship to work on this particular issue for the U.S. EPA in Seattle, Washington. It was a very provocative experience, and I took great interest in the subject. However, it wasn't until years later that I realized the place of the internship had a profound impact on my interpretation of environmental justice. I was learning about a new public policy while working in one of the more livable cities in the country. And both experiences left an impression on me. So to be succinct, I realized that much of the conversation around environmental justice over the years has often focused on the law and public health and waste management, and certainly these issues are central to the conversation of environmental justice. But I've actually spent most of my career looking at environmental justice through a place-based lens. Today's discussion on equitable development is important because proponents for environmental justice and professionals who manage the built environment have a common interest. While many planners have heard of environmental justice, the challenge until now has been framing how to implement it during the planning process, visualizing the product from that process, as well as correcting the misperception that addressing these issues may slow down development. However, thanks to the tireless efforts of researchers and advocates, the creative thinking of planners and architects, and the compelling results of determined community builders, those barriers are coming down. Equitable development is moving beyond the perception of being aspirational or wishful thinking, and today we can point to more tangible results where partners and coalitions are demonstrating that it is possible to do well while doing good. In some ways, EPA has been working on equitable development for years, even though we didn't have a name for it. The earliest example the agency can point to is the Bayview project in Virginia. In 1997, the residents of Bayview were successful in defeating a proposal for the construction of a prison in their community. The victory was sobering, and it left residents thinking they had to make a clear choice: improve the community, or something worse than the prison would come eventually. After realizing the abject poverty conditions within Bayview were an environmental justice issue, local leaders were successful in applying for an environmental justice small grant of $20,000. Although the grant proposal focused on multiple water-related problems, residents of Bayview needed a design solution that included plans for building housing, upgrading the sewer system, adding community facilities, as well as public spaces. The activities undertaken in Bayview actually represented a 6-year, $10 million effort to rebuild a rural village along Virginia's eastern shore. The final outcome demonstrates quite elegantly how citizens can reverse distress conditions when they have access to proper resources. Equally important, the Bayview project had a cascading effect. It helped to solidify thinking around a concept that's gaining traction among architects known as public interest design. Maurice Cox is an award-winning community designer, and it was his firm that worked on the design solutions for Bayview. In a like manner, our federal partners at the Department of Transportation have supported projects which advance the goals of equitable development. A prime example is the Fruitvale Transit Village in Oakland, California. The project reveals the key to creating truly sustainable communities is to be pliable. In this instance, Bay Area Rapid Transit had the option of advancing a proposal which lacked community support, or working with residents of the Fruitvale districts to devise a plan for the area. BART decided it would be better to invest in public involvement and frame a vision large enough to meet the needs of physical, social, and human capital. The outcome is a transit-oriented development that connects the community rather than act as a buffer between neighborhood assets. Also, the Fruitvale Transit Village is a clear reminder that penetrating new audiences and leveraging untapped talent will be critical to the success of place-based initiatives. In summary, I just want to state that projects like Bayview, and Fruitvale and many others are teaching us that citizens who live in communities with environmental justice concerns are not risk-averse to development. Instead, they want development that happens with them rather than to them. Also, proponents of environmental justice are not NIMBYs. They're seeking planning outcomes that are responsive to their needs, as well as being sensitive to some of the challenges that they're dealing with within their respective jurisdictions. As I transition, it's important to explain what does all of this have to do with public policy. In response, I just want to acknowledge that I've worked on urban policy at the federal level, and it's been my experience that the manner for handling issues which fall along the social pillar of sustainability often leave a lot to be desired. Addressing this long-standing gap presented me with two options. Either convince the program where I was assigned that this was an issue that required their attention, or change how I managed the projects for which I was responsible. Eventually, I acted on the latter of the two options, and I made working on these issues appear to be as fun and fascinating as the prevailing approaches for encouraging sustainable communities. And speaking from experience, you would be amazed how quickly a program will warm up to an idea like equitable development once you establish a track record from lecturing and writing, by coordinating recognition programs, by making it a requirement of the grants and the cooperative agreements that you manage, by building relationships with allied professionals, and conducting community technical assistance projects. At the end of the day, public policy is as much about priorities and values as it is about rules, and sometimes the best way to encourage an institution to be pliable is to simply change the way that we manage the projects which fall under our portfolio. Before I wrap up, I want to elevate one more case example. This one involves the co-host for today's webinar, the Planning in the Black Community Division of the APA. A couple of years ago, the division worked on a technical assistance project in Gary, Indiana, and it helped citizens to prepare a vision for the Broadway corridor. Equitable development was the guiding framework for this effort. The study zone for the project included the city's downtown and midtown areas along a 1-mile span of the Broadway corridor. And for many incumbent residents, Midtown represented the heart of Gary's African-American community. It's worth noting there are many notable buildings that were designed by African-American architects in Midtown. VJ Records, which had the U.S. distribution rights for the Beatles, was actually based in the Midtown section of Gary. And Gary's distinctive jazz and blues sound was prominent in the Midtown area. So I'm sharing this really to convey that Midtown is a place that captures the affections of local residents. And so for 3 days, a team of allied professionals conducted a series of workshops that focused on how to strike a balance between encouraging development, protecting the sense of place, and positioning citizens so that they could guide the change process rather than react to it. And a key factor that contributed to the success of the project was the fact that the quality of the product wasn't set or determined by the client's level of investment. Instead of delivering a technical assistance report that the local organizing committee could afford, the division delivered a report that the community deserved. And the Planning in the Black Community Division went to Gary with a $5,000 grant, but it leveraged well over $100,000 in technical support for the city. Finally, I need to say that tangible results are the most important part of any technical assistance exercise. I'll only reference two because we have a limited amount of time. First is the fact that the division, now public policy. In 2010, the Gary City Council voted to amend their comprehensive plan and include this vision. And second, the project received the commendation from the American Planning Association for contributions to the profession. And while the recognition is important, the division really values the fact that the project demonstrates a healthy public dialogue about social equity and community planning can occur when there's a will and a desire to do it. It would be careless of me to conclude without highlighting some resources that will enable you to remain engaged on this topic. First, I recommend that you read The Search for Authentic Signs of Hope, which is the report that Charles Lee mentioned during his presentation. It was prepared by the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council in 1996. It is a very interesting report and a great example of citizen science, as noted by Marva King. And the Advisory Council, I just want to point out, had the foresight to prepare a report about implementing urban revitalization in an inclusive manner before the groundswell actually occurred. They had the foresight to realize that you have to be mindful of what the social impact may be associated with certain innovations and policies. And they were attentive to making sure that this was addressed before that groundswell actually occurred. Secondly, EPA's Office of Environmental Justice has many place-based tools. Over the span of this presentation, there have been a number of references to the collaborative environmental problem-solving model. You can access that particular report, and you will be able to identify many of the lessons that were associated with the Regenesis Community Development Project, which was referenced by a number of our speakers. Third, if you're looking for a broader inventory, EPA's Office of Sustainable Communities added a page to their website last summer that focuses on the intersection of smart growth, environmental justice, and equitable development. And finally, the last item on the slide acknowledges the New Partners for Smart Growth Conference. We'll be having its annual meeting in Baltimore in January. Once again, the Office of Environmental Justice is organizing the workshop on equitable development, and it will be held on January 29. Briefly, I just need to state that when I was a student in graduate school, I only spent about 2 weeks studying the issues that are really precursors to what we currently call equitable development. I never imagined that years later I would actually contribute to the canon of research on this topic. Perhaps Alan Altshuler of Harvard University's Graduate School of Design was right when he said no planner will consider his education complete who has not grappled with the dilemmas that Norman Krumholtz faced. I'm going to conclude with the words of George Bernard Shaw, who said, "There are some who see things as they are and say why. I dream things that never were and say why not." As a practitioner, I'm in the business of giving sustainability a push. I'm a planner, and I work on environmental justice. Today, my goal, as well as the goal of my colleagues, has been really to share that the approaches for encouraging sustainable communities are not restrictive. Instead, they are expansive, and they include concepts like equitable development. Also, I believe the premise of innovation requires acknowledging the fact that healthy things grow, including paradigms. And if we're flexible enough to allow the paradigm of sustainability to account for social equity, environmental justice, as well as equitable development, then we can encourage a sense of balance in planning that will help to foster community parity. And so again, I want to thank you as an audience for joining us today. You have been so patient, and it is now 2:14. So we're about to start the question and answer portion of today's webinar, which will be coordinated by Christine Dursey. Just to point out, I just want to remind everyone that the 2015 Equitable Development Workshop will be held in Baltimore, Maryland. The location for the workshop is the Hilton Baltimore Hotel. You can learn more about the upcoming workshop by going to the website www.newpartners.org. We hope to see you next year at that event. Christine, are you now available for the question and answer portion?
Yes, thank you. And I just gave the screen back to you, Carlton. Do you have that last slide with everyone's contact information?
I
Perfect.
do.
Thank you very
and
much.
It's now up, and I will change it back to you.
Great, thank you. Let's start with, we have a few questions here. Hold on, Carlton, can you just leave that up on your screen?
Oh, pardon me.
That's fine. I'm going to give it right back to you again. Okay, everyone go ahead and feel free to type in some questions with our remaining 15 minutes. This first question is, we received a few of these. I think it would be fit best for Marva. Regarding the CARE program, number one, has it been refunded? Is it currently available? And number two, could you speak more to it, what the process is to receive some of these funds, and perhaps is there an example of a real step-by-step guide? You did go over it briefly, but there are quite a few questions revolving around that. So if you wouldn't mind discussing that for a few moments.
Okay.
Cut off, so hopefully you can still hear us on this end.
Yes.
Marva, go ahead and start. Oh, and Christine, if all I was going to say is that if you do hear us, just type us a message to let us know in the chat box that you do actually hear us. So Margaret, why don't you go ahead and start responding to that question?
Okay. So regarding the CARE program, it is not currently available. It was a couple years ago that the Congress took away the funding for that. What EPA is attempting to do is integrate the principles of the CARE program because they were highly successful, and EPA acknowledges that, and they are attempting to implement them throughout the agency and other community-based programs. The program, Collaborative Problem Solving Grant Program, is currently available. We just awarded 11 grants in that program. And they're up on our environmental justice website. There will be a proposal put out again next year under that. Regarding the question about the process, the CARE process is still up on the web. We're keeping it up on the web. It's because we have so many tools and information that people can learn from, because it's really transferable. The CARE process is really just good government process for people who are working with communities, any level of government. So on one of my slides, I think it was called the Implementation Action slide, where I had the 4 pictures of the sustainability checklist and measurement tools and promising practices. That has the website for the CARE publications. It has the CARE roadmap that's pictured on that slide, gives you a step-by-step process, and most of our communities who were working in environmental justice concerns adapted the CARE roadmap to fit their needs and that step-by-step process for planning and building partnerships. I think I answered all of that. If not, let me know.
All right, thank you. This next question could be for anyone. HIAs, health impact assessments. Could any of the speakers discuss if they've used HIAs before, and if so, how it's influenced equity and environment and local planning or otherwise?
Yeah, this is Charles. The HIAs are a great tool. As you know, they're emerging, and they are tools that really bring the community in to make sure that health impacts are considered when making decisions around new developments or things that may have an impact on the community, like new transportation or housing or other things. The use of HIAs is a new area, and there's been recently a review of, I think, about 80 HIAs that's been performed that EPA has conducted. I don't know the one. There is also another effort to look at how HIAs has been used in national decisions on a national scale, and so that's a little bit different because HIAs are much more they're much more adaptable for local site-specific decision making. So that's just kind of a general, quick drive-by in terms of HIAs.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question could be for anyone. Can the panelists provide an example of a planning project that promoted sustainability and community health in rural areas where industries have operated for decades? Some of our examples were in more urban areas, but can anyone speak to a rural area example?
There were some rural examples with the CARE program that is on our website. And Missouri was one that we worked with a Catholic nun in that community, and they did some planning and had some results. And then I do want to say that even though Savannah is not rural, and Dr. McLean can speak to this, but Savannah is a very small town, and they had been left. They were actually on the edge of the town, and they had been left to, not, they weren't. The city was not really helping them until they developed their planning through these programs. So.
Sorry, this is Dr. McLean. I'd just like to reiterate what Marva said. We are a small city, and the neighborhood that we worked in is very small, but there is a great need for more resources to go toward rural areas. For example, we've been working with a small city in Georgia called Keysville, Georgia. And it's a town of about 300 residents. And the reason why we're working there is because it's right next door to Augusta, which is right next door to the Savannah River site. And so they're facing a number of environmental issues all the way from nuclear, the facility, power plants. But it's a town that doesn't even have its own water and sewer system. So we've been trying to work little by little with exchanging things and lessons that we've learned, tools that we have, and helping them to address some of the problems that they're facing. They now have a new mayor, and they've invited the Harambe House to come and sit with their city council to look at how they can plan to address some of the environmental issues that have been plaguing them for over 30 years.
And this is Carlton Ely, and my apologies, Dr. McLean, and thank you for taking the time to offer more in terms of this particular question. One of the things that I did want to point out is in the presentation that I offered, I did share the project about Bayview in Virginia. That community is actually along Virginia's eastern shore. It is a very small town, and when that project went to the phase of focusing more so on design solutions, their objective was really to rebuild a rural village along Virginia's eastern shore. It was a very distressed community that had a large percentage of substandard housing. Fortunately, Maurice Cox, as a designer, was able to work with the residents in that community in order to help change the trajectory that they were on. So that's one example of a rural community. I also want to point out that EPA Region 4 has had a program called LEAP, Leaders in Environmental Action Pilots. Some of the communities that have participated in the LEAP program have been small towns, some have been rural communities. And so I want to make sure that the audience realizes that we understand that environmental justice is an issue that certainly is relevant not just to urban locations but also to rural locations as well. And so the concepts that we're sharing today has really been about sharing ideas that are transferable regardless of geographic location. And just in terms of one last example, if I could reference one pertaining to the question of sustainability and public health, around 2006 I actually worked on a technical assistance project in Pamlico County, North Carolina, which is a rural community basically in the breadbasket of the state of North Carolina, in order to help that community to address corridor issues within that particular jurisdiction. And so again, this community was mindful of the fact that they have to think critically about how do they grow, how do they maintain their sense of place, how do they maintain their quality of life as opposed to having a pattern of development that would overwhelm them. But the other reason why I'm mentioning that project is because when we took on that technical assistance effort, we made sure that we were deliberate in making sure that it included a section on equitable development, because we realize that often people think about urban centers when they transition and how they may be issues that may affect underserved populations and vulnerable groups, we wanted to be equally mindful of the fact that in rural communities, those same type of pressures or challenges could actually occur as well in those locations. So as a planner, as a civil servant, as a sociologist, we made sure that report included a section on equitable development as well.
Great, thank you, Carlton. This next question is regarding the environmental justice program grants. If someone could speak briefly on the skeleton of the program in terms of who is eligible to apply for such grants, is it at the state level, the regional level, and how does an entity go about competing for these grants, and are there certain times when the grants are available, things like that?
The eligibility is for nonprofits to apply for these grants, but the grants are required to build partnerships, and the partnerships have to be multi-stakeholder. So that's where you bring in your local government, your academia, and others, business partners and others. We are the future, hopefully in 2015, we'll start having these grants available every year for people to apply for. That's our goal. If not, then we'll have them every other year. But right now our goal, as long as we get our funding, is to have them every year. And that's the Collaborative Problem-Solving Grant.
And this is Carlton Ely. The one thing that I do want to point out is the fact that the Office of Environmental Justice does have an environmental justice listserv. If you are interested in getting updates, particularly when the requests for proposals for these grants go out, we would recommend that you join that listserv. If you have any questions in terms of how you can be connected with it, we currently have a slide up that has email addresses for those of us who actually work for EPA, so that Charles and Marva's accounts aren't overwhelmed. I would recommend that you forward a query to me, and I can make sure that it is forwarded to the staffer that actually manages the environmental justice listserv.
I would also like to add that we do have the Environmental Justice Small Grant. That is actually on the street right now. It's a grant that will help a nonprofit that's working in a community start planning and start forming a partnership. So I always look at it as a starter grant, especially for communities that may not have had the expertise or the competency to do to bid on the larger grants. For example, if a community just wanted to educate someone on lead, or how to do healthy homes, or how to do singular activities, then the EJ Small Grants would be a good opportunity for them to apply for.
And this is Carlton Ely again. In terms of the question of eligibility, particularly for the Environmental Justice Small Grants, the eligible applicants must be one of the following entities, either an incorporated nonprofit, including but not limited to environmental justice networks, faith-based organizations, and those affiliated with religious institutions, a federally recognized tribal government, or tribal organizations. Again, these requirements that are associated, or the eligibility requirements for our grants, are on EPA's environmental justice website. The URL is www.epa.gov/environmental justice, all one word. But technology is a wonderful thing, and I'm looking at the eligibility requirements right now.
And thank you, Carlton, for looking that up. But I would also like to add, to emphasize what Carlton was saying about joining the EJ listserv, because not only do we have what EPA's Office of Environmental Justice has, not only we send that out on our listserv, but we send other things out that are related and to community-based work that's related to environmental justice, that comes from other places across the federal agency, as well as the community. So it would behoove you to be a part of that listserv.
Great. Well, thank you. It is 2:30 Eastern Time already, so For those folks that didn't get their questions answered, you're more than welcome to email us and we can direct you further to the appropriate person. So with that, I would like to thank the Planning in the Black community and EPA and, of course, our speakers, Carlton Ely, Charles Lee, Marva King, and Mildred McLean for joining us this afternoon. And everyone, we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.